What's up, guys? Welcome back. Part 2 of our two-part series on anterior horn meniscal lesions. This is technically episode 12 of the Past Your Crime podcast. I'm Alex. Hi, I'm Alex. Just trying to make it awkward because Craig's going to mess this up. This is Craig. He's a physical therapist. I spike volleyballs and have enormous calves and have the better voice out of the two of us.
I'm Craig. I didn't want him to actually introduce me this time in the way he normally does, which is the worst setup imaginable. I'm a physical therapist. I like patient problem pathologies. Don't know volleyball terms whatsoever, but I am learning, and I'm ready to go.
Alrighty. No new injury updates for today, as this is a part of our two-part series. Aside from that, let's kind of jump right back into it.
Can you recap where we were?
Yeah, so we basically identified what anterior horned meniscal lesions are.
Why did you say horned?
Is that not the proper term?
Horn, H-O-R. He's incredibly awkward with this pathology. I heard you practicing it in the mirror.
Well, your practice makes perfect, okay? Horny lesions.
Anterior horn.
Oh, this is going to be tough. All right.
This is going to be tough.
I'll learn.
So where were we again? I think we hit, it's different than just the typical knee injury. Precision matters. Painful passive knee extension. The glute's less important. We're going to dive into why that is in more of the treatment strategy today, right?
And how to fix it.
And how to fix it.
We have, once again, quite a few visuals to incorporate in treatment and actually kind of building out an exercise or a rehab plan, I guess. Sorry. Cool. So now that we know what it is, how do you start treating it?
Well, number one, this is one of them where we want to confirm that it's the meniscus horn that's causing the pain. So what we'll do is we typically start with some level of manual therapy. Now, the manual therapy will be driven at creating full knee motion. And really specifically, we're going to say knee extension. So this will be an example right here. If you're at home, I'll let Alex explain that he's got the beautiful voice.
Craig's twisted my knee.
Works. That's just the worst explanation ever. All right, let's do that again. All right, I'm going to play this again. Alex, I'm twisting his knee. Once again, worst explanation ever. What I'm doing is I'm providing a little bit of anterior to posterior force. I'm pressing down with my left hand on his femur, which is going to generate a little bit of posterior motion of the femur. Means I'm moving the femur backwards. And then I'm actually working what we talked about last time, which is the screw home mechanism. So I'm trying to actually return full motion by getting after his extension while also going for external rotation.
And we did this on both sides.
We did this on both sides.
I don't know that we necessarily have to show the other side, but maybe just a quick explanation of what it is doing it the opposite way.
Well, I mean, it's both the same ways. This is what's interesting with the meniscus is the way that your body developed from the time you're an infant all the way to your current age. The cruciate ligaments and the ligaments around your knee, they work with the bone. And over time, they actually help to create whatever joint you end up having. What I mean by that is if you have any issue that develops in your knee, especially if it's at a younger age, you may have different mechanics, and your meniscus may act slightly different. I'm not saying massively different. And so we find that there'll be pieces where people will have the same injury, but slight differences in how we approach the manual therapy changes the return of extension. So all I was showing on the other was just a different version of the same thing.
Cool. That just popped a question into my head. I feel like kids these days are not getting out and playing enough. I know that I'm always stressing with my daughter, like, get outside, go jump or something, stop, get off the tablet. Are you seeing that in, younger athletes that you're working with now, that they're having less developed knee joints comparatively to, those of us that were running around rampant in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah. Did you know that I almost didn't do physical therapy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my background, I almost went back in to do a PhD in anthropology, and the area that I was most obsessed with was how the knee joint develops through the aging process. And what we found during our research on that before I decided to open my own business was that the load that you do changes the notch width. And so the whole risk for like ACL tears, we were finding evidence that your notch doesn't become what we call it stenotic, meaning the notch is bigger.
What is the notch?
The notch is it's the spot where the ACL is housed. So this is the notch. We're looking at the femur again. And so if you see right here, that's right where your ACL attaches. And if it's smaller, you're actually impinging on the ligament.
Okay, so bigger is better there.
Bigger is better. But what I thought was interesting with that whole body of literature is there's certain points in your time where you need to be loading. If you're not loading, there's consequences, and they're not just consequences for that moment, it's for the rest of your life. I personally believe kids are not as active as they should be, but specifically I think there's girls who they miss this period of time that's really important for bone health and bone development. So I think what girls should be being encouraged to load and load heavy much earlier than what they do.
I've got my daughter in gymnastics, and I'm hopeful that this helps her overall development. And she just likes doing handstands. Don't think that's super helpful for the knees, but
didn't you say she's super mobile?
Yeah, and she's super mobile. So
yeah, thousands of injuries.
Yes,
she's going to have, but it'll be a good one.
No, Olympics. What are you talking about?
Second thing though is so say that one didn't help. We'll switch to other exercises. I want to show another one. You could do things like a terminal knee extension, where it produces very similar mechanics to what we were doing on the table. So say I still think that there is an issue where his meniscus is getting stuck and getting pinched at the front. We can do an exercise like this where we use the band to basically pull his tibia forward, and at the same time he's firing his quad, and the quad has an actual attachment via what's called the extensor mechanism on the anterior horn. So it helps to push it out of the way, pull it out of the way. So when he's going into extension here, what we're doing though is we're making sure he doesn't go into full extension. So if he actually had pain with the normal version, we'll use the heel lift to keep him from going too far. But say after we do like 30 or 40 of those reps and now it doesn't hurt and it feels really good, we'll switch it to this exercise, which is the exact same exercise, but we took the block out. So now he's going into full extension. And really what you're practicing, you're actually mobilizing your meniscus.
And these, I mean, I don't know what I was trying to say here, but it sounds like it's something where like if the leg extension itself, like the leg extension machine that I would use at the gym is painful, this would be a good alternative.
Be a fantastic alternative because your knee mechanics are not the same if it's an open chain. So where your foot's not fixed on the ground and you're doing the leg extension, it is not the same as when your foot is on the ground.
Okay.
So even in this one, the one that we just showed a video of, he's standing next to one of the posts where we do the squat rack, and there's a band connected from the post, and he's facing towards the band, and the band's on his calf. And when he goes into extension, it's pulling his tibia forward while he fires his quad. And what I find interesting about this is when your foot's fixed like that, it actually helps to compress the joint, and you'll typically get less translation of the femur in a bad way on the tibia. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of seated knee extension exercises, which is it's one where you're sitting at the gym and you have the weight that's at your ankle, and then you straighten your knee out. What can happen is you have an incredible load on there, and your tibia is now a huge lever on it, and it can create abnormal mechanics. And so some of the nastiest patellofemoral joint injuries I've had to treat came from that exercise, and also some of the nastiest irritations of the anterior horn of your meniscus. It's just not it's not an exercise I like
for meniscus.
For meniscus,
right?
But if it starts, if your knees feels good, I don't care. But if you're doing it from a rehab perspective to target your quad, you'll literally make your quad weaker.
I like them in an isometric fashion, also for quad strength. But I think that's.
Are you doing it at end range, or where are you doing
like
ISO at?
Mid range.
That would be my suggestion, because I think you'll be able to hammer the quad really well, but it's the greatest stress is on your meniscus. So if you're somebody who's had a previous meniscal tear, going into end range with load in that situation would be a bad idea, even if it's fully rehab, because that's when you get increased stresses at end range positions. But if you're doing it like isometrically, like Alex said, I actually really like that exercise at that point. Go up with 2 legs and then hold
with one. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then this also kind of builds a pattern in your knee, if I'm correct.
It does.
Yeah.
I find that this is very helpful with this exercise. It's very helpful if you have a dysfunctional loading response. So if what's happening when you're walking, if your leg feels really stiff, this is just a great exercise to start.
What are some other exercises that we could use? I know we did a couple of other ones out there in the gym.
If you can't do the quad activation without it hurting, which is a really common problem with this, once again, it does, just because it hurts with resistive testing, it doesn't mean it's your patellar tendon or it's an extensor mechanism injury like your quad or your quad muscle. It can still be the anterior horn of the meniscus. One of them that we'll use to start to work on it is a ideal knee.
This was a fun contraption to use. We'll drop a link in our description to purchase some of these products if you are so inclined, the different bands that we used, and then the ideal knee. But this is basically just getting the knee extension with some added resistance.
Well, yeah. So when he's taking this right here, you'll see that we added an extra piece to it, which is just an ace wrap, and it's at the level of his calf. And what that's doing is it's pushing the tibia in an anterior or forward direction. So when he pushes and pulls his leg into extension, it should clear the anterior horn of the meniscus. So remember, I'm going to show this again because I love this. But when we go into full extension, what we're trying to avoid is this meniscus getting pinched right here, like where my finger's at, right in the front. And so if we shove the tibia forward, you see that I'm not pinching the tibia, or I'm not pinching the finger. So if I pinch here, but if I shove the tibia forward, you'll see how I'm now clearing it. That's the whole idea with this activity. And then you can hold it for time, and what that can do is it can help to give you the extension that you need so you quit pinching it. And then if that's still not feeling good, we have another tool. Not another tool. We can also do what's called a short arc quad. So in this one, Alex is lying on his back because he's lazy. What are you asleep? I think he might even be asleep.
With your
arm. And I have a foam roller behind the backs of his knees. Now, what I'm doing is I'm supporting it. I'm actually providing a little bit of traction, and I'm pulling the tibia forward. The idea in all of these is that you're clearing the meniscus while you're firing the quad. And it really helps to return the anterior horn glide, the glide that should be happening when you go into extension.
Okay. So say those are starting to feel better, then there are exercises that you can progress to kind of beyond that.
Yeah, and we like these in ones in weight bearing. There's a whole version. We call these the Spanish. I actually have no idea why they're called Spanish exercises.
Okay, so this is a Spanish school.
Yeah. So in the same way, it's giving a pull on his tibia again to basically clear it. Now, say that still hurt, we would do it with a heel lift. But if it feels good, then it's totally fine, and that actually will clear the meniscus.
Okay, and then you can progress on to some the heel lift, and then there are some exercises beyond the heel lift as well.
So this would be another version. This would be a split squat, Spanish split squat with a heel lift. And what he's doing here is at the top, instead of letting that tibia go where it normally would, it's giving a little bit of a pull. And that little bit of a pull is enough often to make it completely pain-free. Another version of it, just a more standard one that you may see, this would be a reverse lunge. It's with the Spanish included. Such a stupid name. We're going to not call it that from now on. Anterior pull.
Okay.
We're going to say anterior.
The horned reverse lunge.
Yeah. Ridiculous. So same thing here. You're not normally going to feel the pain when it's going into flexion. So if this hurts at all, you stop. But if you're getting pain at certain points, especially end range, this typically clears it.
Would you add weight to these exercises, like holding kettlebells or anything to that effect?
Typically, I would not load it. But there's going to be moments during a rehab where, say, somebody's actually in season and they need to do something where that exercise needs to happen and they need to keep their strength. We totally will.
Okay.
We'll totally load it. And it's only if it's pain-free. If it actually hurts with loading it will just give you a greater chance of hurting yourself really bad.
Yeah.
I like these ones because it takes away the whole idea of avoidance. Now, you can put a heel lift in someone's shoe as well, which we highly recommend at the start of this because walking is such a humongous trigger. But you can also put it in your shoes.
And it makes you taller.
It makes you tall. It also put it in your shoes, makes you taller. So to go back to one of our previous questions with how tall, I could actually say 6 foot tall if I put a half-inch heel lift in.
Which would still not be tall enough.
It would still not be tall enough, but it wouldn't be embarrassing
For you.
anymore because I honestly, now that I think of it, that would be worth doing.
Yeah.
Permanently doing that.
So we talked about the glutes. It seems like a lot of these exercises focus in on your quads. Are there other muscles? Is the calf involved at all here? Tib? What other muscles are involved here?
What's more important on this one is not force absorption. It's going to be anything that puts your knee into extension uncontrolled. So the biggest two are the anterior tib, or your pretibial muscles. Those are the muscles in the front of your shin that if you pull your toe or you pull your foot, you'll see them kind of fire in the front. I said that terribly.
That's all right. I think people know what they're talking about.
What I'm saying there. The other one's your calf, and they happen at 2 different parts of the gait cycle. So we had spoken about this in the last episode, but when you're walking, you have different phases of gait. At initial contact, your heel should hit the ground, and when you're in that position and your foot goes flat, it's called loading response. That should pull your tibia forward, and your quad should fire. Now, what can happen if the pretibials are weak is instead of pulling your tibia forward, your knee shoots back into extension. So people with pretibial weakness, your anterior tib is not strong enough, they'll rapidly irritate their knee if they start to walk any length of distance. And so even though it's an anterior horn issue, it's a pretibial weakness that's actually driving the symptom. In those situations, the heel lift will help. Shorter steps helps a lot, making it really, really small.
What about tib raises? Would you recommend those?
We call it like the pretibial wall raises work really well. So you're just flat against the wall and you lift your front of your feet off while your heel stays on the ground. That's a great exercise.
Nice. I feel like the only lower leg muscle we haven't talked about here is the hamstring. Do the hamstrings have an effect on meniscus, maybe while playing sport?
They do. Well, actually, can I go back to, because you said calf too?
Okay.
So there's the point in the gait cycle is when your heel is going to raise. This is a common one when people have had a previous foot injury or like a fracture of their tibia, or they've had something that's hurt them in the past. They may not get their calf strength back. You have weak calves.
I have one weak calf.
He has a weak calf.
I don't even think it's weak anymore. It at least used to be weak, but...
Do you remember when you tore it, though, and how painful it was when you loaded it?
Yes. I could not load it at all.
Do you remember how you made it feel better?
Walking on my heels.
Walking on the heels, right?
Heel walks.
And so if you're walking, remember there's 2 points where your knee goes into full extension. If you do what he's talking about and your heel doesn't rise, it won't lift up if you don't fire your calf. And so sometimes you're not strong enough to get your heel to raise. And what happens is you lock your knee back into extension as a result. So a weak calf and a weak pretibial at 2 different points during your walking will blow up your knee, which I find mind-blowing. Like, it's actually really cool. And that's why heel lift, if walking hurts, is so critical, because then you don't have to think about it. It corrects for it so that you don't go into full extension throughout the entire time. And it actually allows it to heal. So sometimes there's individuals where the biggest issue is that they trigger their pain over and over in the gait cycle. This helps to prevent that.
And you're going to get huge calves.
They're going to get huge calves, which is all that matters.
Right.
You were saying, though, the
Hamstring.
hamstring. What I actually find in this situation is the hamstring gets too active. Too much. So especially if somebody is coming in and they have an anterior horn tear, and they've had a meniscal surgery in their past, a meniscectomy, which is where the surgeon goes in and they cut out whatever is the offending or
the kind of frayed part. Yeah.
Sometimes you have different types of tears that we're not going to get into today, where the meniscus may get in between the femur and the tibia, called buckle handle tear. You have to have surgery for those. You can't rehab your way out of those. But then you can also have other types of tears that they'll go in and they'll clean it out. Well, the unfortunate part is there is some pretty solid evidence that causes an increase in flexor tone, which just means that your hamstring is going to be more active than normal. So you won't be able to turn your hamstring off the way you should be able to during normal activity. you'll lose motion because that hamstring's firing all the time, even when the quad's firing, which is what we call a co-contraction. Anytime a muscle that crosses a joint fires, it compresses a joint. And so in those situations, that's not healthy. Like overly firing the muscle is not healthy. It actually destroys the joint over time.
Don't want to destroy your joints.
You don't. So the one that I showed earlier, the short arc quad, this one again. So this is where Alex is again laying on his back. And I'm producing some motion. I actually like this exercise too, because you help the person fire their quad without firing their hamstring. And as soon as this injury happens, your hamstring will become overactive. It'll actually fire more than it's supposed to. So things like this, like a short arc quad where you're really focusing on keeping the hamstring off, is really helpful to treat it.
So just kind of like an overarching question about treatment. Is this one that always is going to require surgery, or can you more conservatively manage this one?
You can conservatively manage this one. This is one of them that will seem that you have to have surgery. It's one that will show up on the MRI. It's one that you'll look and you'll get the image back and it says you have a tear or a lesion to the meniscus, to the anterior horn of the meniscus. But it's one of them that it's so easy to rehab if you have a good process around it. And it's also one of them that you can actually stay incredibly active with if you target it correctly. But it's definitely the one where I think people miss the boat on the trigger management. So they leave things in that hurt you. You know, if you can't fully extend your knees, it means every time you're standing at work or hanging out in a crowd, you're hurting it. Every time you take a step, you have 2 opportunities to smash it. So you have to avoid that as well. People will hurt this one by putting their foot up on an ottoman or, reclining, which would fully put into extension. If you're a stomach sleeper, and I just had this one this week where the person is laying on their stomach and their feet off the edge of the bed, and that would blow their knee up. So you have sleep components to it that can make it feel worse. It's one of them that you can hurt all the time without realizing you're hurting all the time. So that's a huge component of it. And if you do that over time, it just makes it worse.
Right.
But if you can take out the triggers, it actually allows you to build up tissue capacity, actually allows for healing to occur. And then you can get your quad strong. You can make sure you get full motion back. And then after that, you can go after the other things like we talked about, which pre-tibials would be a little bit more important in this one. Same thing with your calf will be more important. And at the end of the day, everything's feeling good. If you want to, go for the glute exercise, but glute won't be the main thing with this injury.
Okay. You talked about a couple of indicators there that like things are progressing positively. How do you know when you're ready to kind of return to full activity after this type of injury?
You have to have full knee motion, both flexion and extension. You have no joint diffusion. So with this one, you don't always get swelling. Typically, if it's a fresh injury, it will, but if it's a degenerative tear, it won't be, there's a good chance there won't be any swelling. So quad strength, full motion, no joint diffusion. And once that looks really good, what's funny is running and a lot of cutting, because you're not going to full extension during those activities, don't hurt you.
Nice.
Yeah, it's one that you get through the basics. The in-game stuff is actually quite easy.
What would you say is a normal timeline for that kind of recovery process?
If you're not constantly triggering, so that's the hardest part is the triggers.
Yeah.
If you're triggering it constantly, this can last for years. Or you go into
Definitely.
Yeah, it doesn't get better. It will, because everyone walks and we all walk the same, it will stay injured, and you'll basically just recurringly injure it every time you take a step. It will last forever. Or you'll end up getting surgery, or you'll self-select out of doing stuff. But if you manage this really well, I've had turnaround on these ones 2 to 3 weeks.
Nice. That seems pretty quick to me.
But you have to clear it, and you have to be able to get motion. But if it's something that's been around a long time, we're not fighting the ability to treat it. We're fighting your ability not to hurt it.
Okay. Well, we've talked about prehab before with regards to injuries. Are there any like prehab or kind of long-term, risk reduction strategies that you would suggest?
I love terminal knee extensions where it's at the calf because it clears it, gets the quad, helps to re-engage the extensor mechanism. I think that's a really useful one. Making sure that your calf stays strong, your pre-tibial stays strong so that you don't accidentally develop a gait pattern, a walking pattern where you slam your knee into extension uncontrolled. Those are probably the 2 biggest. But if you're healthy, it's not one of them that I get overly worried about unless you have a lot of hyperextension. But it's because we walk where we go into extension all the time, it gets hurt easily. So it's one of those injuries that's just, it's very common. and it's one of them that you don't have to experience.
We don't want to experience them at all. You can't strengthen your meniscus.
Can't straighten. No. But you can ruin. So your meniscus is fascinating in that it's called hoop stresses. The way that it's set up, it helps to disperse force. One of the reasons why the whole idea around cutting part of it out is why we're finding that that's not a great idea, is because you lose some of that ability in your meniscus. You can make it less healthy if you yourself are unhealthy, right? Or if you're doing things where you're not moving the leg. So one of the things you can do to help improve the nutrition of the joint is like biking, like monocyclical activity, like a bike where you're not going into full range.
And not putting pressure on the joint at the same time.
Yeah. That type of repetitive cyclical action is actually super healthy for the joint. I think that helps a lot. Not doing things like repeat cortisone injections actually cause the knee to degenerate. That would make it more unhealthy. So what's funny, and it's not really funny, but one of the things is don't do things that make it worse. So strategies for treatment on this one, there's some things you can do that help with short-term relief that actually make it long-term worse. Those are pieces that I mean, with meniscal, and even my cut from my own evolution of how I manage these, I will take a long time to get these to clear, because if we can do anything that keeps the meniscus there and doesn't get you injecting stuff in the knee joint, harmful like cortisone, and not getting surgery, I think your outcomes long term are much better.
Okay, so you've got a meniscus lesion. What's the first thing you do?
Regain full knee extension. I mean, besides, who do you go see?
Either or.
Yeah, I mean, if you find that you're having sharp knee pain in the front of your knee multiple times, like with your walking, you want to know if there's an extension difference. So I would see if I'm in standing and I lock my knees back, if I can't fully extend one of the knees, you have a horn injury, an anterior horny injury.
And a good physical therapist will tell you that that's what you have.
You would hope so. You would hope so. The big part of it with the exam is they're like we said in a couple podcasts ago, the knee exam it's a simple exam, but it's very subtle and it's easy to miss it. I mean, I've trained quite a bit of people on knee exam. There's huge differences in skill set on it. And so if they have it, if your knee hurts and they're immediately taking you down a pathway of it's a tendon injury and they can't show you, and you feel like you have knee extension loss, I would probably find a different provider. But it's that knee extension piece, you have to catch it. So it takes a good exam. And if you're missing it and there can be subtle motion loss, you may also have a patellar tendinopathy, but the exam matters in this situation. So that original diagnosis matters. And oftentimes when we get these referrals, they were not the first person they've seen for it. And what got missed was that they had a meniscal tear and that they were missing extension. And so trigger management wasn't handled. There was no compensation made for walking gait. There was no hands-on therapy that got extension back. And then there was no exercises that reinforced the improvement in knee extension. So you have to go through all of those. But the number one thing is, if I had to say the biggest thing for anybody's knee health, you have to have complete knee extension. If you don't, you cannot walk without irritating your joint.
Go check out episode 10 if you want to see what a good knee exam looks like. And then if you're going to your local physical therapist, try and make sure that they're doing those things.
It is helpful, actually. If you feel like you're missing extension, it is helpful as a provider. If somebody tells me that they feel like they're missing it, actually, it's very helpful to hear that. That's something I would absolutely share. But if you stand up, you try to lock your knees back, and you feel like one of them does not extend as far as the other, put a heel lift in on that side. Even though you don't have a structural leg length discrepancy, but you do functionally. Because as soon as your knee doesn't fully extend, you are now relatively shorter on that side than the other one. Heel lift is incredibly helpful in that situation. So that'd be the second piece. The third part is try to keep your quad strength. Now, with this, your quad will easily become inhibited and can atrophy, especially if you've had this for a long time. And then that becomes its own problem. Because if you have a weak quad, that's the most important force absorber to your knee joint. You're basically just slamming your knee every time you take a step.
Don't want to slam your knee.
Don't slam your knee. I mean, even if you're a volleyball player who only wears one knee pad who likes to slam the knee to the ground.
Yeah. Try not to do it as often. All right. Well, If you don't want to rewatch this podcast to see some of the exercises, we'll have all of those up at pastorprime.com. Aside from that, drop a comment below if you've got some knee pain. We're still potentially looking for a case study out there, or in our little comment section, side pod can address it. Like, subscribe, share, follow, and we'll see you guys next time.
PYP, baby. Peace.